Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Brittany Engel, and I'm an intern and a member of the League of Women Voters of North County, San Diego. Today, I'm joined by member Carol Parker. For over 100 years, the League of Women Voters has worked to create a more perfect democracy. Since our founding in 1920 by leaders of the women's suffrage movement, we have been a nonpartisan, activist, grassroots organization that believes voters should play a critical role in democracy. One of our key roles is education. We have studied the state propositions and local ballot measures you will be deciding and offer our understanding drawn from official sources. The League also advocates for policy matters that align with our positions on making democracy work. Some propositions on the ballot are being endorsed by the League, and you can find that on our website. As you listen, whether proposition or local measure, here are some things to consider. Propositions are proposed laws presented to the public to vote on. Propositions can make new laws, change existing laws, and sometimes change the California Constitution. They can be placed on the ballot by people who collect enough voter signatures or by state lawmakers. Arguments offered by supporters and opponents are not vetted. They are paid for by the proponents. Our role is not to persuade you to vote for or against anything. The decision on how to vote is yours and yours alone. A state proposition passes and becomes a law if it receives more than 50% yes votes. Some local measures require 55% or 2/3 vote from the people. You do not need to vote for every measure or candidate. Leaving a blank does not eliminate your ballot. Use the votersedge.org website link to see your ballot, including details about contributions made by the proponents of a measure. Here are some important voting details. All active registered voters in California will receive a ballot in the mail. San Diego County ballots will be mailed in the week of October 5th. It is important to check your registration online, or you can call this number for the Registrar of Voters. That number is 858-565-5800. That's 858-565-5800. Be aware of registration deadlines. If you are registering or re-registering less than 15 days before an election, that would be after October 19th, you will need to complete the same day voter registration process and request your ballot in person at your county elections office or polling location. If you need to vote in person, polling places will be open for 4 days from October 31st through Election Day on November 3rd. Check your polling place, as many of these locations have changed. Proposition 14, stem cell research bonds. Back in 2004, federal policy limited research on stem cells. Stem cells are used in regenerative medicine to help develop treatments for many serious diseases, including Alzheimer's, stroke, diabetes, cancer, epilepsy, and HIV/AIDS. Here's some background. Rejecting federal restrictions, 59% of California voters passed Proposition 71 in 2004, which affirmed in the state constitution the right of California scientists to conduct stem cell research and established the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, also known as CIRM. $3 billion in general obligation bonds were sold to finance the Institute's research grants. Grants were issued to universities and other entities in California for stem cell research, new treatments, clinical trials, labs and facilities, and related activities. Grantees were required to share income from stem cell research inventions, but only $350,000 in income has been realized. The way it is now. In 2009, the federal government changed its guidelines on stem cell research, lifting the ban on all stem cell research. Since the passage of California's Proposition 71 in 2004, interest on the $3 billion general obligation bonds have been paid out of the state's main operating account, the general fund. About $30 million is remains of the bond. The Institute is cutting back staff as funding runs out. What would change? Proposition 14 allows the state to sell $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds to fund additional grants for stem cell research and the development of treatments. $1.5 billion of that would be earmarked for research for diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Funding would also be used for student and physician training and fellowships at the UC and California community colleges. Budget effects. The total cost of the bond's principal plus interest is estimated at $7.8 billion over a 30-year period, averaging $260 million per year. Proposition 14 limits the amount of bonds which could be sold annually to $540 million over 11 years. Some revenue could be recouped from inventions based on research, but the amount is uncertain. Supporters say that stem cell funding has led to significant advances in treatments and cures for many diseases and over 2,900 medical discoveries. Changes will increase patient access and treatment affordability. Proposition 14 is supported by over 70 patient advocate organizations and leading medical science advocates. Opponents say California cannot afford the $7.8 billion, especially in the time of economic crisis. Interest repayments will increase taxes. Since the lessening of federal restrictions on stem cell research, private investors and companies have become major players in this field. Previous funding has not yet yielded promised results or major economic benefits. To follow the money and to see the latest on the contributors, look on the votersedge.org website using this link. A yes vote means you want California to issue $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds, primarily for stem cell research and the development of new medical treatments. A no vote means you do not want California to issue new bonds for state-financed stem cell research. And now Carol Parker for Proposition 15.
Hello, I'm talking about Prop 15, taxes on commercial property. This proposition would amend the state constitution. It was brought to the ballot by a group of citizens who gathered close to 1.7 million signatures at a cost of nearly $6 million. In 1978, California voters passed Prop 13, which amended the state constitution and set the tax base of all property at 1975 market values and a tax rate at 1%. A maximum annual increase of property tax assessment was set at 2%. Because commercial property is sold less often than residential, and because of a loophole which defines a sale or change of ownership to a single new buyer, many commercial and industrial properties in California still benefit from that initial 1975 tax base with small annual increases, regardless of whether or not legal ownership has changed over the years. The difference between commercial and residential assessments has widened since Prop 13 took effect. For example, LA County's residential values grew from roughly 50 to 70% of total property assessments between 1978 and 2017, whereas the percentage of commercial and industrial assessed values decreased almost 20% in the same period. The way it is now. Prop 13 caused a shift in how schools and governments were funded. The state constitution mandates that a minimum of 40% of California's general fund be spent on K through 12 education, the largest budget component. Nevertheless, California's spending per pupil ranks 39th in the nation. Prop 15 would change how certain commercial properties are reassessed. To be impacted by the new law, a commercial or industrial property owner must have over $3 million in property and an operation of more than 50 employees. Over the next 3 years, the tax base of a high-valued commercial property would be reassessed to current market value at the unchanged tax rate of 1%. From then on, the property's value would be reassessed every 3 years. Small businesses would also not pay any tax on business equipment. Other businesses would not pay taxes on the first $500,000 of business equipment. Small businesses, those with total commercial value at $3 million or less, would continue to be assessed based on purchase price as it is today. There would be no changes in the rules for residential, both owner-occupied or rental or farm properties. Fiscal impact. The estimate of annual increase to California's general fund would be $6.5 to $11.5 billion. Tax on commercial business equipment would decrease by several hundred million per year. Proceeds from this increased revenue would be split between local government and schools. Supporters of Prop 15 says it closes the loophole that has allowed publicly traded companies like Chevron, IBM, and Intel to avoid increased taxes. Importantly, to California homeowners, renters, and landlords, Prop 13 property tax protections for housing would remain untouched. Opponents say California's business cost will be passed through to their customers. They say this will destroy businesses and that others will leave California in search of lower property taxes. The amount of money being spent on the campaigns is sure to change, so please follow the money and see the latest in contributors on votersedge.org on the link that's shown on the slide. A yes vote means that high-value commercial or industrial property will be reassessed to market value, close a loophole, maintain industrial property protections. A no vote means that property tax code will remain unchanged. And now to Brittany and Proposition 16.
Thank you, Carol. Proposition 16, allow public agencies to consider diversity. This proposition, also known as the Affirmative Action Amendment, was passed with a 2/3 majority vote in the legislature and placed on the ballot as required by the state constitution. Here's some background. Allowing diversity is synonymous with allowing affirmative action. The term affirmative action was used in 1961 when President John F. Kennedy signed an executive order requiring government contractors to take affirmative action to ensure that applicants and employees were treated fairly without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. The idea is that passive observance of existing laws is not enough to right the wrongs of persistent discrimination despite protections guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, such as the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Employers, schools, and contractors must act affirmatively to redress these harms. Despite many challenges over the decades, the Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld affirmative action policies since their first court case that was brought in 1978, including as recently as 2016, only disallowing the use of quotas in achieving diversity goals. Court rulings notwithstanding, in 1996, California voters passed Proposition 209, a constitutional amendment which banned the use of race, sex, color, ethnicity, and national origin in public employment, public contracting, and public education, essentially banning affirmative action. California is one of only 8 states that does not allow race or gender to be considered as criteria for these decisions. After 1996, some public entities, especially in public education, created policies and programs to consider characteristics not banned by Proposition 209. Workarounds were developed so that they could use other criteria such as socioeconomic status, regional diversity, and first in the family to attend college, for example, to achieve diversity goals on college campuses. Here's what would change. Proposition 16 would repeal Proposition 209. State and local governments, public universities, and other public entities would, within the limits of the federal law, be allowed to develop and use affirmative action programs that grant preferences based off of race, ethnicity, sex, and national origin. There's no direct effect on state and local budgets as projected, and any future impacts are highly uncertain and depend on future decisions made by state and local governments. Supporters say that women and persons of color continue to suffer unequal treatment, and Proposition 16 is needed to help fight these longstanding patterns of discrimination. Proposition 16 improves access for everyone to opportunities for good jobs, fair wages, and quality education. And finally, and most importantly, it will align state law with federal laws which permit affirmative action. Here is a short list of supporters for Proposition 16. And opponents say that Proposition 16 would be a step backward. The state should treat everyone equally. Preference should not be given to one racial or ethnic group over another. They contend that affirmative action perpetuates the stereotype that women and minorities can't succeed without preferential treatment. Here is a list of the opponents. To follow the money and see the latest on contributors, look on Voters Edge using this link. And then this is what it would mean to vote yes on this proposition, and then this is what it would mean to vote no. Okay, and next is Carol with Proposition 17.
Thank you, Brittany. Proposition 17, parolee voting rights. This proposition is an amendment to the state constitution proposed by the legislature by a vote of 28-9 in the Senate and 54-19 in the Assembly. According to the Constitution, any change to the Constitution must be put to a vote of the people. To give you a bit of background on this proposition, there are two major types of crimes in California: misdemeanors and felonies. Misdemeanors are less serious crimes with sentences of less than a year. Incarceration, if any, is in the county jail. Persons with misdemeanors retain their voting rights. Felonies are serious, violent, or sexual crimes that may result in a year or more of incarceration in a state or federal prison. That would be followed by parole, a period of state supervision in the community for about 3 years. Back in 1974, California voted to allow persons that committed misdemeanors to retain their right to vote. Convicted felons in California are not allowed to vote while in prison or on parole. 19 other states have already passed laws expanding access to voting for people with criminal convictions. California residents who have finished their prison sentences would have their voting rights restored and be able to participate in local, state, and federal elections. Incidentally, registered voters who have the right to run for offices if they meet the qualifications. Addition of voters to the state roll would result in the following expenses. The annual cost to counties of updating voter rolls and distributing voting materials is estimated at hundreds of thousands of dollars total statewide. The state would incur a one-time cost of about the same amount for voter registration cards and updating systems. Supporters say when the state legislature voted on this amendment, 2/3 were in favor. 19 other states have already passed similar voting rights laws. Some point to studies showing lower recidivism rates in states that allow parolees to vote. And a person on parole pays taxes and should have a representative voice in the government. Opponents say that this amendment would allow violent criminals to vote before they have completed their full sentence, prison plus parole. Crime victims are denied full recompense when parolees have rights restored before completing their rehabilitation through parole responsibilities. To follow the money and see the latest in contributors, look on votersedge.org using the link on the screen. A yes vote means that people on parole would be able to register to vote. A no vote means that people on state parole could continue to be unable to vote. Thank you, and now on to Proposition 18.
Proposition 18, primary voting for 17-year-olds. Proposition 18 is a state constitutional amendment referred to the ballot by a 2/3 vote of the legislature. Amendments to the Constitution must be approved by the voters. Background. Throughout our history, there has been a slow but forward movement to expand the suffrage, increasing who can vote. The 26th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1971 during the Vietnam era, guaranteed the right of citizens of the United States who are 18 or older to vote. At present, 18 states and the District of Columbia permit 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of the general election to vote. In California, an individual may pre-register to vote at 17, but cannot actually vote until turning 18 by election day. However, in 2004, the State Legislative Council opined that an amendment to the California Constitution to permit a person under the age of 18 to vote would not violate federal law. This proposition is is about giving eligible 17-year-olds the ability to vote in primary and special elections if they will be of voting age in November. Generally, primary elections are held in spring. During primary elections, voters can choose who will be on the ballot for the November general election, can present themselves as a candidate for office, vote on statewide ballot measures, vote in a special election when there is an open position in Congress or a statewide office. Here's what will change. 17-year-olds who will turn 18 before the general election will be able to vote in primary elections, to have a voice in who will run and be on the general election ballot. The fiscal effects: one-time cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars to update voter registration system, and for each election cycle up to $1 million due to increased number of voters. Supporters say that first-time voters will be able to participate in the full election cycle, helping to create more lifelong voters. Voting is habit forming, and getting young voters who are underrepresented in voting to vote early in their lives will help to increase voter participation. Opponents say that 17-year-olds are not yet adults and not mature enough to be deciding on important measures. They could be too easily influenced by high school teachers or counselors, and they lack sufficient life experience and don't even pay taxes, so they should not be voting on tax and bond issues. To follow the money or the latest supporters or opponents, see Voters Edge using this link. A yes vote would amend the California Constitution to allow 17-year-olds to vote in California primary and special elections if they will turn 18 years old by the November election. A no vote would mean not amending the California Constitution, and 17-year-olds would not be allowed to vote in California. And then Carol with Proposition 19.
Thank you very much. So Proposition 19 is about property tax transfer. Now, and please remember, this is the second proposition about property tax. So Prop 19 would amend the state constitution. It started its life as an initiative petition launched by a political action committee associated with the California Realtors Association, who raised $19 million at the time of the petition gathered the required signatures. After it qualified for the November 2020 ballot, the legislature drafted a compromise version, which is what we are voting on with Prop 19. Prop 19 deals with property tax. This measure is similar to 2018's Prop 5, which would have allowed eligible homeowners to transfer their lower property tax value to replacement homes an unlimited number of times. That proposition was defeated by the voters. Since Prop 13 was passed in 1978, increases in property value assessments were limited to 2% per year. If the home is sold, property taxes are assessed on the new market value, the way it is now. Since Prop 13, additional legislation has allowed eligible homeowners, who are defined as people over 55 or those severely disabled or victims of natural disaster, to transfer their lower property taxable value one time and to a home with the same or lower value, and only within certain counties in the state. Additionally, parents and grandparents can transfer their property to children or grandchildren without triggering a property tax assessment. Prop 19 would allow seniors or severely disabled to transfer the property tax value of their current home up to 3 times to a home of lower, equal, or greater value and anywhere in the state. Victims of natural disasters would be limited to a 1 lifetime transfer. Transferring the taxable value of an inherited property of up to $1 million would remain if it is used as the heir's primary residence or farm. If the inherited property's assessment value is greater than $1 million, the taxable value would be adjusted to reflect the incremental increase in the assessed value over $1 million. So the fiscal effects are that the overall impact of Prop 19 would probably yield local governments and schools tens of millions of dollars per year. Over time, these revenue gains could grow to a few $100 million per year. This increased revenue would be used to fund fire protection. Counties are expected to incur costs to implement this measure. Supporters of Prop 19 say that it closes loopholes in the inherited property rules, which have shortchanged local schools and governments while expanding seniors' ability to transfer local property tax values. They say it protects promises made in Prop 13. Contributions in support of Prop 19 are over $35 million as of September 18. Opponents argue that eliminating protections for inherited properties would remove one of the few tools left for parents to help their children financially. They argue that allowing seniors expanded opportunities to retain lower property assessments would create an unfair advantage for first-time and younger home buyers. As of September 18th, opponents have contributed $45,000. To follow the money and see the latest in contributors, look on votersedge.org using the link shown. To summarize, a yes vote means that eligible homeowners would be able to transfer their lower tax value 3 times. Inherited property must be used as a primary residence to keep the lower property tax assessment values. A no vote means that the current rules for eligibility for eligible homeowners would stay the same and that the inherited property rules would not change. Thank you, and now on to Brittany.
Thank you. Proposition 20, changes to sentencing and parole laws. Proposition 20 would change California laws. It was placed on this ballot through an initiative petition sponsored by 2 members of the California Assembly and other citizens. The cost of gathering signatures was over $2 million. Background. To understand Proposition 20, it may be helpful to review 3 types of criminal sentences: infractions, misdemeanors, and felonies, and the difference between probation and parole. An accused person may be placed on probation before going to prison or jail. If convicted, probation can be part of or all of the sentence. Parole can be ordered as early release after an inmate has completed a sentence, as well as an element of prison sentence for any single felony conviction. Parole is intended to safely integrate a person back into society. Wobblers are crimes that can be charged as felonies or misdemeanors. The district attorney or a judge may make that determination. The way it is now. Over the last 10 years, facing a mandate from the Supreme Court concerning prison overcrowding, voters approved 3 initiatives which have cut the prison population, which is now at 137.5% of capacity among all locations. These prison population reductions resulted from downgrading some nonviolent felonies to misdemeanor by reclassifying some violent felonies as nonviolent offenses, and by loosening rules around parole eligibility. Proposition 20 seeks to reverse some of that. Here's what would change. Proposition 20 would limit early release parole to nonviolent offenders. It would reclassify some 20 crimes currently identified as nonviolent felonies to violent acts. The initiative would authorize felony sentences for some crimes currently treated as misdemeanors, including some repeated and organized thefts. Proposition 20 would increase DNA collection to include samples from adults convicted of misdemeanor offenses and from all juveniles convicted of felonies. The fiscal effects. State and county costs are expected to increase due to higher correctional costs, court-related costs, and law enforcement costs. All of these costs would be related to more persons being in jail or prison for longer periods of time. Supporters say that Prop 20 would restrict parole to nonviolent offenders. They add that reclassifying some offenses would prevent early release of violent offenders and tighten the supervision of those granted parole. They claim increasing DNA collection will improve public safety. Supporters include law enforcement, unions, grocery store chains, and multiple Republican lawmakers. Opponents say that Prop 20 would create the need for more prisons. Opponents believe that current laws are strong enough and that increased costs would restrict rehabilitation and mental health programs. Opponents include Californians for Public Safety and Rehabilitation, former Governor Jerry Brown, and the ACLU. To follow the money and to see the latest in contributors, look up on Voters Edge using that link. A yes vote means that you support adding crimes to the list of violent felonies, restricting parole, and recategorizing certain types of theft and fraud as wobblers. Finally, you support increased collection of DNA samples. A no vote would mean that you do not support changes to the criminal code and further restricting parole eligibility. Also, a no vote means you are against increased DNA collection. And now on to Proposition 21.
Hi, Prop 21 is rent control expansion. This proposition came to the ballot by a petition launched by Michael Weinstein of the AIDS Foundation, proponent of the failed Prop 10 in 2018. Prop 21 cost $3.5 million to gather enough signatures. The background is that during the 1970s and 80s, 13 cities adopted rent control ordinance, which varied from city to city. Some included a provision where landlords were limited in how much they could increase rent after a unit was vacated. The way it is now is that there is a shortage of rental housing in California. As a result, California renters are paying 50% more for housing than other states. 20% of California renters are living in a few major cities which have rent control housing. Rent control limits how much rents can increase annually. The Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995 limited local rent control laws. This law did not apply to single-family homes or new housing built after 1995. Costa-Hawkins also permitted landlords to decide on the rent to charge when a property is first put on the rental market. Landlords could increase rent prices to market values when a renter moves out. In addition to Costa-Hawkins, a new law in 2019, AB 1482, restricts annual rent increases on older properties to no more than 5% plus inflation, or 10% yearly. Landlords currently pay income tax on rental income and property tax on the value of the rental property. Court cases have guaranteed them a fair rate of return on their properties. So with Prop 21, cities and counties could expand rent control. It could be applied to most housing 15 years or older, except for single-family homes owned by people with 2 or fewer properties. Cities and counties may limit a landlord to only 15% increase in rent over 3 years at the start of a new tenancy. The fair rate of return principle for landlords would become law. There are possible changes to the fiscal effects, is that there would be possible changes to the rental market, including a sell-off of rental properties, which would reduce supply. The value of rental housing could decline. Lower rents could mean less landlord income and income tax payments, and/or some renters may move less often. Property and income tax revenues could be reduced in the tens of millions of dollars per year, depending on how many cities expand rent control. Local government costs could increase in the low tens of millions of dollars yearly for administration costs. The supporters of proposition say that rent control keeps housing costs down and provides stability for renters. As of September 17, 6.9 was raised for supporters. It was the largest donor. The largest donor is the AIDS Foundation. Opponents of proposition say rent control doesn't address the housing shortage in California. As of September 17, over 45 million was raised. Large donors are property management firms. To follow the current money and see the latest in contributions, look on votersedge.org using the links shown. So in summary, a yes vote gives governments expanded authority to enact rent controls on residential properties. A no vote will maintain current limits on city and county rent control. Thank you, and on to Brittany.
Proposition 22, app-based driver classification. California employers can hire workers in one of two categories, employees or independent contractors. Because many worker protections do not apply to independent contractors, California labor law lays out strict rules on how a worker is to be classified. Here's some background. A whole new industry has developed in the last 10 years around app-based rideshare and delivery drivers. Today, as many as 800,000 Californians work as independent contractors for companies like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart. These app-based companies, mostly headquartered in California, benefit by not having to pay employee protections such as workers' compensation insurance and unemployment insurance. Neither had these companies been required to pay into benefit programs such as Social Security and Medicare, or other employee benefits such as sick leave and healthcare insurance. Here's the way it is now. In 2019, state law AB 5 was passed that requires those companies to hire drivers as employees, subject to state labor laws. In August of 2020, the courts ruled that Uber and Lyft violated AB 5 and misclassified their workers since the law took effect. Proposition 22 made it to the ballot by a signature drive headed by Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash. Here's what will change. If Prop 22 passes, California labor law would be amended to add a new category of worker, the app-based driver. These workers would remain independent contractors with some special considerations, including minimum wage plus 20% while driving, medical costs if injured on the job, arrest policy, and some health insurance costs for certain drivers. Budget effects would be minimal to the state. Supporters say that roughly 80% of drivers work less than 20 hours per week. Categorizing mostly part-time drivers as employees will increase costs. Companies will likely hire fewer drivers. Additionally, supporters say Proposition 22 would improve app-based driving work by requiring companies to provide new benefits. As of September 9th, $180 million has been spent in favor of Proposition 22 by Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, Instacart, and Postmates. Opponents say that these companies are buying themselves a special exemption from the law to avoid having to pay their fair share. They add that categorizing drivers as independent contractors eliminates workplace protections. Additionally, they say that AB 5 allows for part-time drivers. As of September 9th, $4.8 million has been spent largely by Teamsters and other unions to oppose Proposition 22. Please go to Voters Edge for the latest figures. A yes votes for app-based rideshare and delivery drivers as independent contractors. A no vote keeps app-based drivers as employees, subject to wage and employment protections of California labor laws, affirming California AB 5. And now on to Prop 23.
Thank you. So Prop 23 is increased dialysis clinic regulations. Prop 23 would change California laws and was brought to the ballot by an initiative funded by the Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare West. $5.5 million was spent to gather signatures to qualify. This union has been attempting to unionize the largest dialysis businesses, DaVita and Fresenius Medical Care, since 2016. Some background. To begin with, a little background. If a person's kidneys stop working, they need a special treatment called dialysis from a licensed chronic dialysis clinic 3 times a week, with each treatment lasting up to 4 hours. These clinics are licensed by the California Department of Public Health using federal certification standards, which have limited requirements about staffing hours or ratios. The way things are now is that currently approximately 600 licensed clinics operate in California. Most, but not all, of the clinics are owned and run by 2 private for-profit companies, DaVita and Fresenius Medical Care. Under current federal regulations, a person a patient's personal doctor must visit them at least once per month during treatment at the dialysis clinic, but regulations do not require the doctor to be on site for a specific amount of time. Also, infection-related information is reported to a national network. Proposition 23 requires at least one licensed physician on site during all treatment hours at the clinic. However, it allows for exemptions if there is a shortage of qualified licensed physicians, or if the clinic has at least one nurse practitioner or physician assistant on site. This prop also requires dialysis clinics to report dialysis-related infection data to the state as well as the federal government. Additionally, it will prohibit clinics from closing or reducing services without state approval. And it prohibits clinics from refusing to treat patients based on the source of their payment for care, such as private insurance versus Medicare or Medi-Cal. The fiscal effects of Proposition 23 are that there could be an increase in healthcare costs to the state and local governments if the clinics negotiate higher reimbursement rates, or if some clinics close and patients have to receive treatment at more expensive facilities. The costs are estimated to be in the low tens of millions of dollars annually. Supporters say that this initiative will make common sense improvements to the dialysis treatment that will protect some of the most medically vulnerable people in our society. As of September 17, $6.2 million was raised in support. Opponents say that Prop 23 would make our physician shortage worse and lead to more overcrowding in emergency rooms. Dialysis clinics are already strictly regulated and provide high quality care. As of September 17th, over $73 million has been raised to oppose Prop 23. To follow the money, again, look on votersedge.org using the link on the screen. Finally, a yes vote supports the requirements that dialysis clinics have an on-site physician while patients are being treated, have more reporting of dialysis-related infections, obtain consent from the state health department before closing a clinic, and not discriminate against patients based on the source of payment for care. A no vote opposes this ballot measure. Regulations will not change. And now on to Brittany for Prop 24.
Thank you. Proposition 24, amend consumer privacy laws. Proposition 24 is a citizens initiative, but there's a twist. The sponsor, Alistair McTaggart, a San Francisco-based real estate developer, had launched a similar initiative in 2018 to provide consumer data privacy protection. He withdrew his 2018 initiative when the legislature passed the California Consumer Privacy Act. Proposition 24 seeks to amend the act passed by legislature. To qualify for the ballot, 620,000 verified signatures were gathered at a cost of $4.3 million. Here's some background. There has been an increased call for privacy protection around the world as data is collected from consumers, web browsing, online shopping, social media, and location trackers. This collected data is often sold to other companies who use it to market their products to us. The European Union implemented data privacy protection regulations in 2018, allowing sanctions on data companies for non-compliance. California's Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 is considered the toughest consumer privacy legislation in the nation. Since the law was signed, there have been changes to this act to align it with other privacy laws and clarifications. The act went into effect in January of 2020 and was enforced starting in July. The way it is now is that consumers have the right to know what data is collected, delete personal data, opt out of data collection for adults, opt in for minors 16 and under. And currently businesses regulated by the act are determined by several factors, including earning 50% or more of their revenue from selling collected data. Here's what would change. Proposition 24 would create a new state agency to enforce data privacy regulations. The determination of which business is regulated would be modified. Businesses would have to make it easier for consumers to opt out of data collection and to correct errors. Businesses could only identify a general area geolocation. Some data would be reclassified as personal or sensitive. Proposition 24 would increase penalties for infractions, and consumers would have more rights to sue for damages and data breaches. Proposition 24 allows the legislature to make changes to this law only in ways that are consistent with and further its purpose and intent. The fiscal effects is that it would cost the state $10 million annually to create and run the new state agency. There is expected increased annual enforcement costs of in the low millions of dollars, offset by collection of fines from violators. Here's what the supporters say. The arguments are on the slide, and there has been $4.7 million contributed by Alistair McTaggart as of September 3rd. And that is what opponents say. And the opponents' arguments are listed there. And then as of September 3rd, there has not been any money contributed for the opposition campaign. To follow the money and to see the latest in contributors, look on votersedge.org using this link. And lastly, a yes vote means that you want to modify the act and create a California Consumer Privacy Protection Agency. And a no vote means that you do not want to change the California Consumer Privacy Act. Okay, and then now on to Proposition 25.
Thank you, Brittany. Proposition 25, replace cash bail system. This proposition is different from the others. It is a referendum. There was a bill passed excuse me, by the legislature, then signatures were gathered to oppose it. Sponsors of the referendum spent $2.7 million to gather the required 567 signatures within 90 days of the legislature's action. Proposition 25 is about bail, basically a promise or a guarantee that if released, someone charged with a crime promises to return for trial or sentencing. As part of a wave of criminal justice reforms in 2018, the legislature passed and Governor Jerry Brown signed SB 10, a bill that would replace bail with a system that grants judges greater power to decide who should remain incarcerated before trial. A day after Governor Brown signed the bill, a national coalition of bail agency groups launched a referendum drive to overturn it. The group had collected enough signatures to qualify the measure for this election. SB 10 was suspended from becoming law. Some call a referendum the people's veto. The people must decide on SB 10, which is why this is on the ballot. The way it is now is that it currently stands that some people accused or charged with a crime are arrested and taken to jail before they are arraigned in court to hear the charges against them. Except for certain felony crimes, people have the right to be released before trial. A promise or making bail a financial guarantee to appear in court is part of the release process. If a defendant has enough money to cover the bail amount, then the defendant would get the bail cost back after the court appearance. If a defendant does not have the bail amount, a defendant can borrow it from a bail bondsman by paying a 10% fee that is not returned whether you appear in court or not. The alternative is to stay in jail. The bail industry, considered part of the insurance industry, is regulated by the state. In 2018, the bail industry issued $6 billion in bonds and received $560 million in fees from accused people seeking release before trial. What would change? If Prop 25 passes, SB 10 would go into effect and the cash bail would be eliminated and replaced by a process conducted by a pre-trial assessment division within the courts. Judges would use these assessment tools to determine the risks of defendants coming back to court as low, medium, or high, determined by the state's judicial council. State and local costs to operate the pretrial assessment process would increase by the mid-hundreds of millions of dollars per year. County jail costs could decrease in the tens of millions of dollars annually. Supporters argue that the current system is unfair. Defendants who have money can go free until their trial. People who do not must pay non-refundable fees or stay in jail. People who are eventually found not guilty or not even charged may be stuck with large debts to pay off the bail bond fees. Opponents fear that the new assessment tools will be unfair to minorities and that more people will be jailed because judges will have too much power to put more people behind bars. To follow the money for the latest contributions for this proposition, see Voter's Edge using the links seen. To summarize, if you vote yes, cash bail will be unlimited and decisions about pretrial release will be based on risk assessment. If you vote no, cash bail system will be maintained as it is. So I want to say in closing, thank you for your time and attention. If you have questions, we would love to hear from you. Here is how to reach us. We have phone numbers of both the League of Women Voters and the San Diego Registrar of Voters. The Registrar of Voters number, like what Brittany said in the beginning, is 858-565-5800. And you can also reach them at sdvote.com. I would just like to say thank you again, and the League welcomes your support of our work by becoming a member or contributing on our website. Thank you very much.